The topic of our today's video is an attempt to understand if the Ukrainians and the people of Donbass are the same nationality. Or are they different? If there are differences, then what are they? And if the differences could lead to today's conflict in Ukraine. Let's try to figure it out. To understand the causes of today's conflict in Ukraine, we will probably again have to turn to history. Since usually all modern conflicts have their root causes deep in the past. The history of modern Ukraine dates back to the 9th to 10th century, the century of the emergence of Kievan Orthodox Russia. And as you know from our previous videos, in the subsequent historical period from 11th to 19th centuries, the territory of modern Ukraine had a very complex, long and dramatic history associated with frequent military clashes and the struggle among large states and empires for these lands, faith and resources. During the period of 14th to 17th centuries on the lands of modern Ukraine on the right side of the Dnieper River, the Orthodox Russian people were subjected to strong assimilation of Poland and Lithuania both on the basis of faith. They were forced to accept Catholicism, and on the basis of their native language. They were forced to speak Polish. And therefore, the Russian language in this territory during this time was transformed from Russian into a kind of hybrid of Russian and Polish. And this dialect later became known as the Ukrainian language. The Polish influence on these former Russian lands during 14th to 18th centuries actually created a new national identity, Ukrainian nation. But the people of Donbass, who lived on the lands on the left side of the Dnieper River, preserved the Orthodox faith and the Russian language, actually preserved their national identity as Russian. But some external influence on these people was also carried out. So are the Ukrainians and the people of Donbass the same? Or are they different? If there are differences, then what are they? Under the Polish assimilation, changes arose, of course. Not only in faith and language, but also in culture, national traditions, national costume, folk art, music, songs, dance, construction and other areas. For example, the traditional men's costume of the right bank people consisted of a hemp or linen shirt, which was tucked into trousers. The upper section of the shirt, pazushka, is certainly decorated with embroidery. Often the men's suit was decorated with oak leaf embroidery, a powerful amulet of the family. The collar can be standing, turned down or absent altogether. The lower part of the suit, shirovary, harem pants, wide trousers of a burning red or bright blue color and is fixed on the belt with a cord. Wide trousers outwardly resemble a bag. This style is convenient both for agricultural work and for performing the Ukrainian national dance hopak. Women's Ukrainian national costume was much brighter and more intricate than men's. Girls flaunted in koshul, long shirts with embroidery along the edge of the neck and on the sleeves. Everyday shirt was sewn from rough cloth, but on holidays the outfits of Ukrainian women were distinguished by a riot of colors on a snow-white silk background. The girls wore long shirts without outerwear, girded with ribbons or sashes. Married women necessarily complemented the outfit with a jupon, a sleeveless jacket and outer belt clothing, for example. A durgo gathering in large folds at the back. As a bottom there was a poniva, a long motley skirt with an embroidered apron. A festive version, plakta, was sewn from silk or brocade, complemented by unique patterns. The traditional Ukrainian house was called khata. This is an interesting and original work of the people, an original phenomenon in the history of architecture. Throughout the right bank Ukraine, the khata is characterized by an elongated rectangular shape, a hipped roof. Classical for Ukraine is considered a three-chamber kata, composed of living quarters, a vestibule and a pantry. As a rule, katas were built from materials that were at hand, that is, from the cheapest. The whitewashing of the walls, which was common everywhere, gave the Ukrainian kata elegance. The whiteness of the walls of the kata contrasted sharply with the greenery of the gardens, so that the walls do not get wet, and on hot summer days there is a shadow in the house. Sheds were made along the main facade, based on posts. The Ukrainian kata is famous for its beauty and originality. Its outlines are expressive, light and picturesque. Left side of the Dnieper River. People of Donbass also got changes also happened with the people of left side of the Dnieper River. People of Donbass over the period of 14–17 centuries in culture, national traditions, national costume, folk art, music, songs, dance, construction and other areas. For example, the traditional men's costume of the left bank people of Donbass consisted of a black Circassian coat, dark-colored pants, a beshmet shirt, and in winter, a burka cloak, papaka hat, bashlik hood. Cover it entirely taken from the mountain peoples of the Caucasus. The Circassian looks like a long kaftan at the waist, tight-fitting on top, from the waist with expanding floors. The sleeves of the Circassian coat had a bright lining, since its lapel was a kind of decoration of the costume. On the chest, the Circassians sewed a lining for gazes. Gazes in its original meaning, is a storage place for cartridges that were at hand at any time. Over time, gazes lost their true purpose and became a characteristic decoration of the costume. A beshmet shirt was worn under the Circassian coat, a shirt with a high stand-up collar and a long narrow sleeve. In winter, a beshmet was worn warm, quilted on wadding. A papaka, a lamb hat with a cloth top and a burka cloak was thrown over the Circassian coat, a shaggy felt cloak without sleeves, black or, like a festive, white. The hood bashlik was also an integral part of the costume of the Donetsk warriors in winter time. The traditional women's costume of the Donetsk people was formed by the second half of the 17th–18th century. It consisted of a skirt and a jacket, the so-called couple. A suit was sewn from factory fabrics, silk, wool, velvet, chintz. Sweatshirts or cottons were of various styles, fitted, on the hips, with a frill basket, the sleeve is long. Smooth or heavily gathered at the shoulder with puffs on high or narrow cuffs, a stand-up collar or cut out in volume neck. Elegant blouses were decorated with braid, lace, stitching, garis, beads. They liked to sew skirts with lush, finely gathered at the waist from 4–7 shelves, each up to a meter wide. The skirt below was decorated with lace, frills, cord, small folds. The underskirt, spidnitsa, is an obligatory accessory for a women's costume. It was sewn from thin white or light fabric with lace, often decorated with embroidery. It is especially worth talking about the women's shirt. It preserved the basics of the Russian women's costume, a long tunic-shaped shirt with long puffed sleeves on the cuff. The shirt was considered the outerwear at home. Girls have ribbons in their hair instead of headscarves. In the Donbass in the 18th to 19th century, due to a sharp increase in the number of settlements, it was then that border defense lines were created. And changes took place in the organization of settlements. These settlements were usually called stan. Apparently, the name comes from the word stan, which, in Russia in the 11th–17th centuries meant the name of a military camp, which was usually set up on an elevated place and fortified with wagons. The traditional house of the inhabitants of Donbass was called Kuren. The word Kuran is of Turkic Mongolian origin, the same as the Russian stan. Donetsk Cossacks built such houses from local natural materials: straw, reeds, brushwood, clay. The floor was mud. Roof made of straw or reeds. Outside, the Kuran was whitewashed. Such a house was divided into 2 living quarters, the great half with a Russian stove in the back corner. In a small half there was a stove, long wooden benches, and a table. In the great half stood custom-made furniture. The central place in the house would be the red corner, which consisted of 1 or more Orthodox icons, decorated with towels, and a square table. Towels are traditionally decorated with a predominance of floral ornaments, geometric shapes, and a paired image of birds. The October Revolution of 1917, according to Lenin, was supposed to radically change the situation in the sphere of spiritual culture. This period is characterized by the destruction and denial of traditional values, culture, morality, religion, way of life, law, and the proclamation of new guidelines for socio-cultural development. World Revolution, Communist Society, Universal Equality and Fraternity. The Soviet Union tried to form and educate a generation of new people based on communist ideas. And therefore the Soviets planted communist culture and ideology with all their might, while distancing themselves from their national historical roots implanted unified standards in clothing, culture, architecture and other areas of human life. House building, for example, has lost its originality and turned to a same-type grey dull Soviet architecture style spread all over former USSR. Arriving in any city of the Soviet Union, be it Georgia or Ukraine, Lithuania or Kazakhstan, it would be difficult to immediately understand which city you ended up in. As such, typical Soviet-style architecture dominated everywhere. During the period of Soviet Ukraine, changes affected not only architecture but all aspects of the life of the peoples of modern Ukraine, their traditions, costume and other areas of culture. For example, the traditional national costume of the inhabitants of both western Ukraine and the inhabitants of Donbass lost many of its characteristic features, giving way to more practical city outfits. And yet, the descendants of these people have preserved the memory of their ancestors, and many now can boast that they have the traditional folk clothes of their ancestors in every family. Moreover, in every family member,